Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to Newry Chamber of Commerce and Trade's webinar on the Trader Support Service. My name is Colm Shannon. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Newry Chamber of Commerce and Trade. Our session today will provide an opportunity for you to hear a further update from representatives of the Trader Support Service. I'm delighted to welcome Shanker Singham, Frank Dunsmuir and Shanker 𝗣𝗔𝗡𝗟𝗏 from the Trader Support Service to provide the latest updates and information about the support they provide businesses. Since TSS went live on the 21st of December, there have been several updates, including several key enhancements and releases to the TSS service. Our webinar will cover these changes and provide you with the latest information. Before we start, just some background on our panelists. Shanker is Chief Executive Officer of Competere. He's one of the world's leading international trade and competition experts and a regular commentator on TV, radio, and in newspapers. Frank is the industry lead customs and trade at Fujitsu UK and Ireland, and a leading expert in international trade and customs. Both Frank and Shanker have been with us before, but I'm delighted that we're also joined today by Shanker, who is a business consultant who spent the last 2 years working with future border management with Frank. She's currently supporting on the delivery of TSS with a particular focus on stakeholder engagement. Shanker, Shanker, and Frank, you're very welcome and thank you for joining us this morning. Before we get started, can I remind you about questions? The best way to put your questions through as we run through the presentation is to use the Q&A facility. And then at the very end, we'll try to mop up on the questions that perhaps haven't been answered live. So please prefer if you use the Q&A facility rather than the chat facility at the bottom of your screen. Also, the slides will be available afterwards. I'll get a copy of the slides and send them out to everyone. So that's the introduction. I'd now like to pass over to our panelists to make a start. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Colm. What we're going to do is what we call TSS Seminar 4, which is very much focused on the new sort of products that we have made available. Show you some of the updates and some of the things that are relevant to the most recent release that TSS has come up with. So so what we're going to do is I'll just do a quick recap on the service so far and a recap on the process. I'll then walk through the transit service to the extent that that's relevant to people. I think that probably will be quite relevant here. We'll then talk about the groupage model, the so-called consignment first. We'll go into what's happening on Monday if you are an SPS goods trader. This is very relevant to you. The simplified frontier declaration for SPS controlled goods. There are some changes that you need to understand before Monday. And then we'll talk about the supplementary declarations and the tariff options, and then we'll have a Q&A. So if we can go to the next slide. Just a reminder of what the TSS is and what it isn't. We obviously have this 800-person contact center now. The best way to use the contact center, there are tier 1 agents who are focused on the very basic registration questions. You know, if you have a problem with your password, that sort of thing, it's appropriate to ask them that question. There is a tier 2 set of agents who have at least 2 years of customs experience, and they certainly can answer some of the customs related questions. And then we have tier 3 agents who have at least 7 years, and some of them have, you know, much more than that, 20-30 years experience in customs, and you can ask them some of the more sort of difficult customs questions. And if you're not getting an answer, then you can always escalate that ultimately up to Frank and myself. So we'd like you to go through the system with the contact center so that appropriate case can be raised for you. But you know, there is always the ultimate escalation as you go through the system. What TSS won't do, however, is it's not set up to provide a sort of personalized advisory service. So this is the kind of thing, the kinds of questions you'd ask your customs intermediary or your accountant, basically, about how you would minimize how you would handle your movements into Northern Ireland. What TSS will do is, once you've decided what you're going to do, TSS will make that work for you. Part of this is because we don't want to, with a free, government-supported service, knock out the existing intermediary market that exists in Northern Ireland. TSS is a temporary service, and once we leave the market, we have to make sure that the existing intermediary market is able to take up the requirement here. TSS also doesn't do what we call non-standard documentation. So if you're an SPS goods trader, you trade in agricultural products or in food, you do have to raise the health certificates and the other SPS-related documentation yourselves. Of course, there is the Movement Advisory Service in DEFRA, and the UK government will pay for those health certificates and those SPS certificates, but you still have to raise them, and you still have to raise, do your traces notification and put your 𝗦𝗘𝗔𝗞𝗘𝗥𝗦, get your Common Health Entry Declaration, the 𝗦𝗘𝗔𝗞𝗘𝗥𝗦 form raised yourselves. So that's a little bit of a summary there. In terms of the service itself so far, if we go to the next slide, what you're seeing is around about 32,000 per week is the level of declarations, the ENS, the entry, safety and security declarations that we're doing. So it's more than 200,000 so far this year. And the SFD on the third row there, stabilizing at around 26,000, and we've raised over 150,000 of those to date. We now have, as a result of release 2, which came into the picture on February the 15th, supplementary declarations that we're raising as well for traders, and around 27,000 per week of those. And what we're seeing with trader registration, I think we are up now to 35,000 as of yesterday. So registrations of traders increasing, 26% of all those registrations since the 1st of January. So what the market is telling us is that our system is generating declarations, is working, and that's why people are registering for it. We didn't anticipate there would be many more registrations after January the 1st. We certainly didn't expect to be at 35,000. I think our initial numbers were about 12,000, but that, I think, is just an indication of how much TSS is being used by people. It is very much a digital first service still. 60% of inquiries are online. Inbound calls are answered within 6 seconds on average. The service has not been down. There's been some media coverage suggesting that the TSS service has been down since at times since January. That's not correct. It has been 100% available. What we are doing in the contact center, though, is we're doing quite a lot of outreach. So there's quite a lot of outbound calling from the contact center, which we didn't expect. And they are outbound calling traders to help completing supplementary declarations, because we understand that is a difficult process. We'll talk a lot about that today, but we do understand it is a very difficult process for you, and that's why the contact center is outbound calling to help. If we go to the next slide. This is just our internal metrics on the ENS transactions. That's the entry, summary, safety and security declaration. About 1,800 movements peak. It's usually midweek where you have the peak, and it follows that kind of curve that you see with a slowdown at the weekends. That seems to be fairly stable now. If we go to the next slide and the next one. So just to recap on the process between GB and NI, this is important to keep in mind because of the requirement for supplementary declarations now. So the starting point is to make sure that traders and their hauliers and their, and suppliers have agreed both the Incoterms, the terms of trade you're on. All of those Incoterms require the importer to be the Northern Ireland importer to be the declarant, and that is that is the case for all Incoterms other than DDP. And then we have the TSS portal will accept information for the Safety and Security Declaration, the ENS declaration, which also generates the Simplified Frontier Declaration, from the haulier or from the trader. So you need to decide between yourselves and the haulier who is putting that information on the portal. Now the carrier is responsible for it, for the entry summary and safety, the entry summary declaration, but the information can come from the trader or the haulier or both. That information generates the Simplified Frontier Declaration. And just to remind people, TSS has deliberately broken this, the import declaration, which is a single unitary document, into two. We've done that through the application of what's called Customs Freight Simplified Procedures, CFSP. TSS has that authorization, and we're able to give that authorization essentially to every trader. So you get to use this simplified process so you can get goods across the frontier with a minimal amount of information. Of course, what that does mean is that at some point you're going to have to put the rest of the information that would go into an ordinary import declaration, and that's the supplementary declaration that you're starting to see communications from us on. So we'll generate the SFD. So far, TSS has been providing the MRNs for carriers who then take that, they register with GVMS, which is the Goods Vehicle Movement Service. That generates a so-called GMR, which is the Goods Movement Reference Number, and it's that GMR that enables you to get through the ferry terminal, or enables the haulier to get through the ferry terminal and move the goods from GB to Northern Ireland. Once cleared, the goods can be transported to Northern Ireland premises, delivery is completed. But, and this is what is the new functionality that's gone into play on February the 15th, which is the supplementary declaration. So you now need to provide that information in order to complete the supplementary declaration. And this is the point at which any duty that might be applicable would have to be paid. And therefore you need to think about what duty would I be liable for? And we'll cover that off at the end of the presentation, how you make that decision and how you use easements like the UK trader scheme, which is the not at risk scheme if your products are coming in only to Northern Ireland. And there will be a rebate system at some point in the future. That's not been decided entirely between the joint committee, between the UK and the EU in the joint committee, but it is definitely being discussed right now. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about the transit service, which I think for members of the Newry Chamber in particular may be of great interest to you, as you are so close to the border. From the 1st of January, with the UK leaving the transition period and leaving the common commercial policy of the EU, there are only two ways to move goods through Irish ports into Northern Ireland from GB. One is transit, and the other is a direct export to Ireland, entering the goods into free circulation under the protocol on the island of Ireland. Now, TSS will not support that second option because that is the same as a movement from the UK to any European member state. And that's why TSS doesn't cover that option. You will need a customs intermediary to help you with that. But we do cover transit. And we have put together what we think is a very simplified transit process for you. Why should you use it? It minimizes the paperwork. It minimizes the number of Irish customs processes you need to interact with. It also reduces the need for export declaration processes from GB into Ireland, which you would need for that other route that is a direct entry into Ireland. You need the full export declaration set from GB. You'd need the full import declaration set from the Irish side. Transit enables you not to have to do that. And TSS will do literally almost everything that you would need in order to do a transit movement, with one exception, which I will come to. And this is just a note on the process, which comes from a former head of the Dutch customs brokers, one of the world's leading authorities on transit, Hans Malsen, who knows transit pretty well and thinks our process is about as good as it can be in terms of simplifications. And our focus here is to give traders something that is as simple as possible. So we go to the next slide. So this is a summary of how the process will work, or does work, because it's been live for about 3 weeks and people have been using it. We've had quite a number of transit movements already. You'll use the TSS portal to submit your ENS declaration. You'll do the same thing that you do when you're doing a normal GBNI movement, except in this occasion you'll select the GBNI via Ireland route, which is one of the options on the portal. TSS will then send you a transit template for you to complete and return. TSS will send you the entry summary declaration MRN and the transit local reference number. You would seal the truck. You arrive at the office of departure. That's when you start the transit, and you'll collect from the office of departure. And if you're going Holyhead, Dublin, you would basically start the process at the Road King facility, which is the office of departure in the Holyhead area, and they would print out the TAD, which is the transit accompanying document that you need, and the relevant MRN. We will notify Border Force on your behalf. The only requirement that we ask carriers to do themselves is to submit a PBN, that is the pre-boarding notification, to the Irish system. That's the Irish equivalent of GVMS. Now that is a very straightforward process, and we did a webinar recently, and we'll send you both these slides and links. Shonali will send you links to everything that we refer to here. And there was a presentation from the Irish Revenue Commission about the PBN and how it works and how straightforward it is. And I'm conscious that there were some issues with the PBN early on in this process, but we are beyond those now, and I think we're in a relatively simple procedure for the PBN. With that, you've made your Office of Transit, you've fulfilled your Office of Transit process for the Irish side, and the ferry, you can then get on the ferry and cross from GB to the Irish port. You clear the Irish port and then continue to the Northern Ireland destination. Now there's a number of ways you can close the transit. You can do it in the normal way with the transit, which is an authorized consignee location, and the authorized consignee will then close the transit on NCTS, which is the transit convention, the electronic system, and they will contact TSS to confirm the goods have arrived. Or remember, I said that we will notify Border Force at the beginning of your transit movement. If you arrive after 6 hours in Northern Ireland and you have not heard from Border Force with a request for you to come to an office of destination, and they may say to you in that 6 hour period, come to the office of destination in Belfast, Larne or Warrenpoint. And obviously if they say that, then you need to follow those instructions. If on the other hand you've not heard, you can go straight to your point of unloading, and you can essentially contact TSS to confirm the goods have arrived, and we will take care of notifying Border Force, closing the transit. It is also closed through a alternative customs process. So the SFD that would have been generated when you first put the information onto the TSS portal, and which was held in the TSS portal until this moment, will then be completed, and you'll get the same supplementary declaration request for information by the 4th working day of the following month of the movement. So that'll close the transit, and you'll be good to go. So if you go to the next slide, please. One additional point, if you are trading SPS goods, so agricultural goods, food, products of animal origin, all of this sort of stuff, you do need, when you enter Ireland, from a SPS standpoint, it is like entering Ireland as if you were entering Ireland directly. And that means you do need to fill in the appropriate certificates and so forth for that food or that agricultural product. And that means that you need to notify traces NT, and it's the Irish traces that you need to notify. Now, a Northern Ireland importer can do that, you know, that you don't have to be an Irish importer to do that. And therefore, we got a link there of how you do this. It's really important that you do the traces NT registration 24 hours before arrival in Ireland. And you know, we're working with the Irish authorities. We have a regular call with the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine in Ireland to make this as simple as we possibly can. But you do need to do it. And if you don't do it, then the probability is that your goods would be held up in the Irish port. So if you want to avoid goods being held up in the Irish port, you need to do this. You know, make sure you've done this process. And if we go to the next slide, please. Now, obviously, a lot of people have asked about moving goods NI to GB, and NI to GB. There are three ways of doing this. One is obviously the direct movement NI-GB, which is covered under the unfettered access provisions of the protocol and don't require anything, except if you've got one of those 14 treaty cases like Kimberley Diamond Mining or CITES, the endangered species treaty, or if you've got goods moving in duty suspension, which is relevant here because if we were to do a transit from NI to GB via Irish port, that would require not only the transit documentation that I sort of broadly went over in terms of the other way, the other route, but you'd also require an export declaration from Northern Ireland to GB. So for that reason, we want to make this as simple for traders as possible. That's why TSS is not going to support that transit route. You can do it if you have a haulier who is ready to do it, has the transit guarantee, has the appropriate authorized consign or consignee locations. You can certainly do it. But what we'd rather you did, frankly, is to use the indirect export route, which we currently do. You can do it now on TSS. But it's not a customs indirect export right now. What it is, it's using the free circulation on the island of Ireland to move goods to the Irish port, and then you exit the Irish port as if it's an export from Ireland, with all the normal procedures as if you were exporting directly from Ireland to GB. Now, what we are putting together is a simplified way of doing that, that will allow you, for example, if you're using the Dublin Holyhead route, to move your goods in a simpler way as possible. So it's essentially an export declaration from NI to GB, as if with the place of export as Northern Ireland and the place of exit as the Irish port. We will provide the export declarations completely, and those are export declarations NI to GB. And the trader or the haulier will create the PBN on the Irish RoRo system. And that's, again, the same pre-boarding notification I referred to earlier on for the transit the other way. That is the only thing you would need to do additionally to the export declaration. Until July, you in terms of entry into GB, you have a phased border in the UK. So you don't have any import declaration requirement at the moment. And we are working to make sure that whatever you would be required to do in order to enter GB is as simple as possible. And we're locking that down right now, and we will have that in place for you very shortly. We go to the next slide. I'm going to now hand over to Frank to talk about the consignment first model, because we had a lot of questions from groupage hauliers in particular about issues about using our system. So we've created a system that is much, much more user-friendly for groupage hauliers, which Frank will describe now.
Thank you, Shanker. Before I start that, there's a number of Q&A questions, some really interesting ones that have popped up in the chat. I've answered a few, and several have also said we'll cover during the seminar, or at the end we'll go back to them because they just need a little bit more clarification or explanation that would just take too long to type through. So we will cover those questions. Consignment first, as Shanker mentioned, the first iteration. If I go to the next slide, it's easier to describe this in the visual representation here. So the first iteration of TSS had this particular structure in terms of how the data is provided to the TSS service. 3 levels of information: a header, a consignment, and an item level. The header level, as we call it, is the first set of pages that you would enter, and this captures the vehicle details and the journey details. So this is where typically the carrier, the haulier, will determine or notify which vehicle is carrying the goods and which port it's going to on what day, and they'll put the identifier of the vehicle in there, etc. Then they will decide what consignments go on that vehicle. A consignment being a shipment of goods from a consignor or to a consignee, from a seller to a buyer, and they could have 1 or more consignments on that vehicle, so they can create consignment records to go on that vehicle as well. And that's where you enter the EORI numbers and the details of who the buyer is and who the seller is, and a description of the goods, a general description of the goods. And then for each of those consignments, we need to list the items that are included in that consignment. And depending on the nature of those goods, that could be very high level information, or it might have to go down to commodity code level information, in particular for SPS goods and control goods. So that is the original structure. You have to progress through that process: header, consignment, and then item level. You could leave the header blank and put it in later, but the feedback in the early days from a number of carriers, in particular those that operate a groupage model where there's more than 1 consignment in the vehicle, said we actually work the other way around. We create the consignments first, and then on the day we decide which vehicle those consignments are going in. So can we have it a consignment first process? And that's what we released on the 14th. So now, and there's a number of advantages to this process, which I'll highlight as we go through this. So now it's possible to create a consignment first on the portal. So if you are set up as a trader, you can start to log your orders on the system. So you may be a paint and painting supplies supplier in Great Britain, and you may be selling some of those goods to clients in Northern Ireland, to buyers in Northern Ireland. So as you're taking your orders, you can put those as consignments on your account. So 3 tins of paint for client number 1 in Northern Ireland, and then another consignment, another order might be 4 tins of paint and some paintbrushes for client number 2, etc. So you're building up your consignment detail and the items that belong to those orders on the portal. The same with trader 2, trader 3. Any trader can list their consignments as they receive the orders. When those traders or the suppliers are ready to arrange transport, all they have to do is agree with their preferred transport organization, their preferred carrier, that they will take those consignments, and then in order to present those consignment details to the carrier, they just need to put the EORI number of that carrier into that record. So the 3 tins of paint that I mentioned at the beginning, if we're going to send those to Acme Transport Company, then we put their EORI number in and it will pop up in Acme Transport account. What you can't do is submit those consignments, by the way. You can't create a declaration at the consignment level. It has to go to the carrier. The carrier will then decide, they'll have a growing list of consignments that have been allocated to them. They'll then decide, as they plan their operation, which consignments they're going to group, which ones they're going to put on each particular vehicle. And when they've decided that, they'll create the header for the vehicle, which is the vehicle details, the journey details essentially, and they will click on the consignments that belong to that vehicle. So a much simpler process for the hauliers and the carriers. And they can then build up that profile, and when they're happy that that reflects the manifest for that vehicle, they can hit submit, and they'll get the declarations that are required, the movement reference numbers. So it'll generate the safety and security declaration for that movement, and it'll generate the simplified frontier declarations for the consignments. A number of advantages in this system. First of all, the carrier can now work or the groupage carrier can now work in the same way that they worked previously, which is they'll look at the consignments and then they'll decide which goes on the vehicle. It works efficiently for that model. The second thing is it spreads the workload now, so the consignment work can be done at the trader level instead of having to be sent to the carrier to input. And the third thing is we don't send the commercially sensitive information to the carrier anymore. So if you've got prices that need to be stated on some of your items or important commercial information like that, it will stay on your record, and the carrier won't see those details. So if the carrier is working for one of your competitors, there's no danger of you sharing a commercial invoice across that portfolio. So that's available now. It went in on the 14th, and I think it's been very successful with the groupage industry in particular. And on the next page, as with all of these releases, we have new how-to guides on the user guide portal on the TSS. So if you look at tradersupportservices.co.uk, you just scroll down to the user guide button, press that, and it'll take you to the Northern Ireland Customs Trading Academy page, where our how-to guides are held. And there's a selection of written documents and videos, so you can actually see it being done, and you can refer to a document to walk you through step by step. We won't go through it in this session, but they're there for you to use. And on the next page, a word about the simplified frontier declaration for control goods. So the second change that we made on the 14th of February is that we introduced more controls, more information to be input on the simplified frontier declaration for controlled goods. And I'll hand over to Shanker to talk us through that.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. And this is very, very important for those of you who are dealing in SPS goods in particular. And that's obviously a very big category of people. So I'm going to talk a lot about SPS. This is goods of animal origin, plants, all of these things. There's a little bit of confusion with what is controlled and what is not controlled. When you see on the portal, are you dealing in controlled goods? This refers not only to customs controlled goods, which will be things like dual use military equipment and certain pharmaceutical products and so on, and certain SPS goods. It also applies to what is traditionally called DEFRA controlled goods or SPS controlled goods. So if you are dealing in products of animal origin, plants, anything to which SPS rules apply, you do need to treat those as controlled goods, and you do need to fulfill the requirements that are required for those goods. So it includes pharmaceutical products, food, excise, other licensable products, and the process has changed or will change on Monday. And on Monday, what will happen is the link into the customs declaration system, the CDS system, for this particular type of product will go live, which means that you need to make sure that you are inputting the 𝗦𝗘𝗔𝗞𝗘𝗥𝗦 information. In other words, you're doing your traces registration, you're getting your 𝗦𝗘𝗔𝗞𝗘𝗥𝗦 form, and you're inputting the 𝗦𝗘𝗔𝗞𝗘𝗥𝗦 form into your declaration when you type it in on the TSS portal. Because if you don't do that, then the system, the CDS system, will not generate a movement reference number. And if it doesn't generate a movement reference number, then that has implications for the goods movement reference number for the truck, and that may prevent the truck from going into the ferry terminal. If you remember, I said the GMR was the sort of passport to get through the ferry terminal. So the important point to take away from this is it's really important that you do the traces registration for GB to NI controlled goods or SPS controlled goods movements, so that you don't have that issue. If you do it properly, everything should work fine. For controlled and SPS goods, the simplified frontier declaration does require that additional information on it in order for it to be accepted by CDS. Now, this doesn't affect any of the goods you've moved already. It's only for the future. And if you look at the data requirements page and you look at the user guide, you will find information that you need in order to fulfill those requirements. So we go to the next slide. So if they are SPS goods, what do you need to do? Well, the seller has to get you the export health certificate. So that needs to come from the GB side. And as a buyer, as an importer, what you have to do is to do the, and what you must do, because only the Northern Ireland importer can do this, registered on Traces NT, you do the Traces registration, that generates the 𝗦𝗘𝗔𝗞𝗘𝗥 document, and that's what you put onto your import declaration. If you go to the next slide, please. And we got a diagram. I don't want you to get too worried about this rather complex wiring diagram, but we did want you to see how these processes work. But the thing for you to be worried about is the bottom two rows. So the bottom row has what the supplier or the exporter needs to do in order to generate the appropriate documentation. And the row, the penultimate row, the buyer, the importer, that says what the buyer has to do. And you'll see that these are not, from the buyer and the supplier point of view, these are not massive exercises. Everything above the TSS column is where the sort of complex process occurs, but you don't see any of that. We just wanted you to understand how it works, so that you can see where you fit into the overall process. And I'll ask Frank to just sort of go over that that diagram.
Thank you, Shanker. And I was busy typing in some answers there. So the workflow, this is for SPS goods. You have a similar process for control goods and certificates, etc. So in the interest, it might not be relevant to everybody in the session. I'll go through it fairly quickly, and if there are any particular questions or you want to contact me about the process, then please do. Happy to go through that. So on the left-hand side in blue, we have the various organisations or parties involved in the process, and then going along the right-hand side there, from left to right, we have the process flow, and the arrows show what happens in the boxes, and where the boxes are tells you who's performing that function. So on the bottom left, we've got the supplier and the buyer. The supplier obviously sending the product and the buyer purchasing it. So if it's SPS goods, animal or plant products, typically, or control goods of some sort, then for these particular products, you'll need a health certificate to be arranged. So they'll have to arrange for a veterinary inspection or an official inspection to create and release the export health certificate. Again, the TSS doesn't provide that service, so that is something that you need to make sure is looked after by a relevant party or agent within that process. They will also require an importer to create what's called the 𝗦𝗘𝗔𝗞𝗘𝗥, the Common Health Entry Document, which is above that. So this is the importer's responsibility. Again, there's this relationship about responsibility and the actual agent that performs the function. It can be performed by an agent, but it remains the buyer's responsibility to create that import document, which describes the nature of the goods and the route and the transport that will be used. And that goes on to the Traces system, which is an EU system. The notification there, we've been asked to highlight that it needs 24-hour notification for port health authorities. So they will see that entry on traces, that those goods are due to arrive tomorrow or next day. And they use that information to determine if they want to make any particular inspections, physical inspections, etc. Those are critical that notice is given. And then back to the supplier, once that process is in place, the point of, usually around about the point of loading, the health certificate is performed. The 𝗦𝗘𝗔𝗞𝗘𝗥𝗦 is updated with the health certificate number. So that contains important information about the health certificate. And then the vehicle is sealed, and the official seal number that's used to seal the vehicle is also put on the 𝗦𝗘𝗔𝗡. So the 𝗦𝗃 contains quite critical information, and you can see how the port health authorities and the likes of DERA will be looking closely at the 𝗦𝗃 to make sure that the documents have been filled in with the right reference numbers in order to be satisfied that this is following a compliant path. The next bit in the middle is those documents, the 𝗦𝗃 documents, will need to go to the carrier who's inputting the ENS declaration, the Entry Safety and Security Declaration, and whoever is inputting the Simplified Frontier Declaration, which might be the carrier, or it might be the customs agent, or it might be the actual supplier putting that record in, will need to enter the 𝗦𝗃 number in the declaration as well. So that's an important feature. That's one of the things that we talked about earlier, which is one of the changes of the Simplified Frontier Declaration process that went into TSS on the 14th of March, 14th of February. So it now requires the 𝗦𝗃 number for certain commodity codes. And once that's been processed into the TSS, the movement reference numbers are created, and it's the same process as before. Those reference numbers are used to create a GMR with the GPMS system. And once you've crossed the channel and onto the arrival port, it's the port health authorities will decide on the nature of the inspection. They will usually inspect the seal. In fact, I think it's 100% check on the seal, it's the right seal. So the seal number needs to match what's on the declared 𝗦𝗃 form on traces, which also needs to match what's in the declaration as well. And the important point around this is that process is, there's a number of systems there, and you'll see that not only the 𝗦𝗃 form number is in a couple of places, but things like the vehicle registration number exists on 𝗦𝗃 form, and the health certificate and the declaration as well. So consistency of information is going to be important on this. So to get through the health and port health inspection as smoothly as possible, if all that documentation is aligned, then you've got the better chance that you won't be subject to a physical search as well as just the seal search. So I'll normally check the seal number is correct and it's not been tampered with. And then obviously once it's passed those checks, the goods can be moved forward. And I've made a bit of a focus around those checks and those consistency of information. That really is on the basis of feedback from the port themselves, you know, the officials at the ports saying that that consistency of data is what they're looking for. So it does help with moving goods through those ports. And on the next slide, I think here we talk about the traces system. Sorry, on the previous slide we've talked about the traces system. Here's just a reminder of what traces is. And where you can get registered on the traces system. And then that's two bits on the next slide. So we've got a link there of how to register on traces on the next slide. I wanted to cover this for a question that came up as well in the chat box. The new Simplified Frontier declaration process that we've launched will, for certain commodity codes, it will ask for a document reference or a reference code that's associated with that particular commodity. So for example, you might have to put in a document reference to say that this is organic beef or it's not organic beef. You can choose between the two codes. And then you have to put in a reference statement for that code, such as it may say something like this complies with EU Directive 164. I made that up completely, but it could be as descriptive as that. Or you might have to put in a document reference number in that field. So the question that came up earlier was, do I need, what code would I need if it's not organic, or I think it was something like that. It's very difficult for us to say what codes you do or don't need. So in the user guide, we highlight for you where to find on the government systems, the gov.uk systems, a list of the codes that are required. So you need to type in your commodity code, you look at the drop down and it will say, here are the codes that you need to consider for that commodity. You can then look at the reference for that code and you will be able to determine if you need that code or not. And you can then, if you decide that you do need that code, the document user guide describes where that code goes into on our portal. So this is a bit of a process. It's probably more of a one-off. It's not something you have to do all of the time. So once you've covered that commodity code and you're satisfied that you've got the right reference codes and document codes for it, then you've pretty much done that one for the next time and the next time. So there is a bit of work to be done up front to make sure you're clear about those. But once you've done it, you can reuse that process, as it were, the next time you need that commodity code. So the reason why we pulled this out is just to show you what that process looks like and how the guide handles it. And we've got the links to the actual guides there on the system, as well as on the next page, there's a link to somebody showing you how that works on the video as well. The next slide, I'll hand over to Shanker for the next, I think. Oh no, so do you want me to cover this one, Shanker?
Yeah, why don't you do this and I'll come back in for the tariff.
Yeah, okay. So we've covered consignment first, and we've covered the additional functionality on the simplified frontier declarations, which were 2 of the changes that came in on the 14th. The third one is we've started the functionality, we've made available functionality for supplementary declarations. So you can now create a supplementary declaration. There's been a few questions about that in the chat, which we will cover. The way we're introducing the supplementary declaration function again is in stages. So the current stage is we're introducing the, if I dare say it, the simplest supplementary declarations to start with, which is you can raise a supplementary declaration for goods that are moving into free circulation, goods that are not at risk, and goods that are not subject to controls and licenses, etc. If your goods don't fall in that category, then the functionality, additional functionality for those goods to be able to submit as declaration for those goods will be arriving later in March. So you won't be able to use the TSS to raise those supplementary declarations until then, which means you will miss the 4th of March. But if you're using the TSS and that functionality isn't there, then obviously you can't submit for the 4th of March. And that's understood. But for the others, the encouragement is to make sure that we get those supplementary declarations done. This chart talks about where it sits in the process. So on the left-hand side, you've obviously registered on TSS, you've submitted the declarations, you've transported the goods, and then once the goods have passed through the ports, so GVMS has told us the goods have moved through the ports, we've assumed they've arrived. And what TSS will do then is it will send an email to the owner of the declaration, and the owner of that declaration we identify as the IORI number in the importer field on the simplified frontier declaration. So that's a really key field, because whoever's down as the importer on the simplified frontier declaration will get the email to say, we believe you received the following goods, declaration, please complete the supplementary declaration for those goods. So that will arrive, as I mentioned before, as an email based on the GVMS registration, GVMS date that says it exited the port. And you, on the next slide, I think we just, and on the next one, I'll skip over this one if you don't mind, Shen. and you have until the 4th working day of the following month to complete the supplementary declaration. So that's a very high level view of the, if you like, the dates and the processes. So it's a rolling process in terms of the time. So you'll get the email message within at the arrival date of the goods, but you have until the 4th working day to actually complete the supplementary declaration. On the next slide, we've got the obligatory link to a video. The supplementary declarations are that bit more complicated, so it is worth looking at the video to see how it's done in real life. Some examples there of how the TSS portal works. And again, of course, there is supporting documentation around that. But what we'd like to go through, rather than spend what would be an hour or so trying to show you how to submit a declaration on the system, you can see the video on that. We'd like to talk about some key points on when you're raising the declaration, particularly the at-risk factors that people often ask about. I'll hand over to Shanker for that one.
Right, so thanks, Frank. So the critical thing when it comes to do your supplementary declaration is you need to have a sort of strategy. You need to understand what it is you are going to be declaring in your supplementary declaration, and you need to do it in such a way that you minimize, any tariff burden that you might apply to those goods movements. And we've endeavored to make this as simple as possible, but you are going to have to sort of get to grips with the processes in order to understand how this affects you. And the first thing to read is the declaration data requirements for supplementary declarations, as always, on the Northern Ireland Customs Trade Academy website. The first thing that I would say is when you're entering the information onto the TSS header, so the first 2 additional information or AI codes there that are relevant are the ones that are put on the header. And 𝗦𝗣𝗘𝗥𝗦 refers to goods moving under free circulation, which is what for most people this will be. 𝗦𝗡𝗐 is for goods moving under special procedures, which is a different, this is things like customs warehouses, transit, these sorts of things. For most people, it will be 𝗦𝗣𝗐𝗏. And it's important you enter the right one, because the architecture of this takes you down a completely different pathway if you enter the wrong one. When it comes time to do your supplementary declaration, even if you are using the UK trader scheme, which I will come on to in a second, which is the not at risk scheme, it does not mean that simply because you're on the scheme, you don't have to worry about what you put on the customs, on the supplementary declaration. You do need to put in this additional information code of 𝗦𝗨 for goods that are not at risk. So it's a 2-stage process. Get on the UKTS, so you're a not at risk trader, and then put in the 𝗦𝗨, because you're saying I'm a not at risk trader and these goods are not at risk. Now, if you don't use 𝗦𝗨, there is another AI code that you might use, which is 𝗦𝗨𝗡𝗏, and that's what you'd be using if you want to claim the waiver. And the waiver is the subsidy, so you don't have to pay the duty. And that's up to the level of the EU state aids de minimis. And I know there was a question about the amount of that, which is typically €200,000 over a 3 fiscal year period. That relates to the duty that you'd be paying, not the value of the goods. So typically, rule of thumb, based on a 4% average tariff, the rule of thumb is it's about £1.5 million of goods coming in from GB to NI that you'd be able to bring in without, and claim the waiver for the duty. Obviously, if the tariff rate's higher, which it is for things like agriculture and so on, that might be a lower amount that would be eligible for the duty if you're not, if it's at risk. And if a duty would be payable under the terms of the trade agreement between the UK and the EU. What other information do I need to provide? You need to provide the tariff codes, the import commodity codes, and we got guidance on exactly what the information you need to provide. If you've got licenses or controlled goods or SBS controlled goods, you've got documents that you need to provide, may need to provide based on the easements that you might have. All of that is in that guidance, which is on that link there. We go to the next slide. So now, in order to determine what do you do if you think your goods might be not at risk, you might be a not at risk trader, whether you use the waiver, what does the trade agreement say? I mean, all of this we've reduced into a sort of decision tree. And this relates to GB to NI trade. And so these are the questions that you would ask, that you would ask yourself. First of all, is the EU common external tariff, the EU duty to the rest of the world, is it zero? Because if it's zero for your particular product, then you default to not at risk. And therefore, you would never have to pay a duty because the duty is zero. So that's the first question. Now, the reality is that there's very few products where that would apply. So most of the time, your answer to that is no. And most of the time, the next question is, does the trader have UK TS authorization? So can you register on the UK trader scheme? And there are certain requirements to register on the UK trader scheme, which we have dealt with in a number of webinars, which we can send you a link for, and in a tariff advice on the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy. There is the authorization link for the UK trader scheme that we put up there. And broadly speaking, you need to meet the end use criteria in order to be registered on the UK trader scheme. You need to be selling to a consumer facing facility, which is retail, or wholesale selling to retail. So you need to satisfy that in order to be on the UK trader scheme. And the principal thing that you need to be able to prove is that you've got control over GB to NI goods movements. In other words, you know where your goods are going, and you know that they're not going into Ireland, and there's a specific way or control system you have in order to prove that. And you know, the way to think about this is, you know, if you were audited about goods going into Ireland or not going into Ireland, what would you say? What evidence would you provide to show that they didn't go into Ireland? If you satisfy the rules, the criteria of the UK TS, then you can go on to the next question, which is it subject to EU trade defence measures? So certain products that are subject to EU trade defence measures, you will not be able to use the UK trader scheme and the not at risk category. Those are always at risk. And that is because of an agreement between the UK and the EU in the Joint Committee. So goods like steel, which are subject to a special a quota system and a steel safeguard that the EU has imposed in response to the US's national security based action on steel coming into the US. So what the EU has done is it's basically you have a quota that you can get into tariff free, and any product above the quota has to pay a 25% tariff. So unfortunately, you cannot be on the UK trader scheme for those products. But again, for the most part, your products are not going to be subject to EU trade defence measures. And then the question would be, if it's being commercially processed, then it generally defaults to at risk, except if a quite broad set of exceptions are met. And those include things like food processing, which you can be not at risk provided you satisfy the other requirements of not at risk. And there are other areas where so things like construction industry, things like not-for-profit activities and so on, where processing, you can be an exception, you can be not at risk. And then provided you meet the end use criteria and so on, then you can be on the UK trader scheme and you can be not at risk. But as I said at the beginning, that's only half the battle. You know, you get into that category, and then when you do this, the supplementary declaration, you need to make sure you're putting that NIREM additional information code in, so you get the benefit of the zero tariff. Now, the logic of this, and it's important to understand the logic because it helps you work through the problems. The logic of this is that Northern Ireland, under the protocol, is in the UK customs territory. So if you're a not at risk trader and your goods are not at risk, they are basically moving from one part of the UK customs territory, GB, to another part of the UK customs territory, Northern Ireland, and therefore the trade agreement between the UK and the EU doesn't apply. So you don't need to worry about rules of origin. You don't need to worry about all the potential for tariffs being imposed, the 𝗣𝗣𝗘𝗥𝗦 case, for example. I mean, you don't need to worry about any of that. You will never pay a duty because it's just a movement inside the customs territory. So that's a terribly important easement. It is one of the few, probably the only steady state easement, which means that it is there permanently. A lot of the other easements that people have talked about, the supermarkets easements, the FPO, fast parcel operator easements, these are temporary easements. You know, they may get extended, but they are temporary. They can't, by definition, be the steady state. And so if you do qualify for this, it is incredibly important that you register for the UK trader scheme. The deadline for getting a provisional authorization has passed. That was February the 28th, but this does not mean you cannot register for the UK trader scheme. You can, and you should, if you can take advantage of it. Now, what happens now if you register is there will be about a month-long process while HMRC evaluates your registration, but you will then get the registration, and it could prevent you from having to worry about duties. And as I said, while I don't know what the future will hold, you know, it would seem likely that if there are further simplifications, many of them will hang off this UK trader scheme because it is, as I said, the only steady state easement in place. So, you know, if you're not on it, then you won't benefit from those simplifications that I think are possible. So again, we don't know that, but from a business standpoint, there is no downside risk of you registering on the UK trader scheme. It doesn't cost you anything. It's a relatively straightforward authorization through the link that we posted there. And there could be, in addition to the duty, which is a significant benefit by itself, there could be other benefits as well. So from a business standpoint, it would be always something that you would do. And I say this because we have been quite surprised by the low take-up of the UK trader scheme. And that is one of the reasons why people, I think, when they start coming to complete their supplementary declarations, are quite surprised that they have to pay a tariff. And that is because of the rules of origin requirements in the trade agreement, which I'll come to in a second. So that's the decision tree. And just one final point there on the decision tree. If you can't benefit from the UK trader scheme and you don't benefit from the rules of origin of the trade agreement, so if you're at risk, then you're not on the UK trader scheme, your goods are not at risk, you're an at-risk trader and your goods are at risk, then the tariff that you would pay is determined by the terms of the UK-EU trade agreement. The EU-UK trade agreement has specific rules of origin, which means that not every good that comes from the UK, that comes from GB into Northern Ireland at risk, is going to benefit from the preferential zero tariff, zero quota rate. There are some goods that will not satisfy those rules of origin. The rules of origin provide not only that the goods must be substantially transformed or change tariff classification in GB, there are also local content rules, and sometimes these local content rules are not satisfied. And if that's the case, then you can't claim the preference. And then you will pay a duty, and you'll pay the duty at the common external tariff rate. the EU's common external tariff rate. Now, you may be able to claim a waiver in that case. And the waiver, as I said, was €200,000 over 3 fiscal years, which if you estimate a 4% average tariff for industrial goods, is about £1.5 million worth of imports from GB to NI per year. So that's the sort of number you would be thinking about. Now, for a lot of agricultural goods, and this was the 𝗣𝗣𝗘𝗥𝗦 case, for a lot of, or rather a lot of SBS goods, the tariff rates are quite high in the EU common external tariff, and those and that means that that waiver may not go so far. So you need to think about that when you're looking at the waiver as well. But again, if you are bringing in SPS goods and you think you are not at risk, you think you qualify for not at risk, the way you avoid all of this is to register for the UK trader scheme. Otherwise, you will be subject to the EU-UK TCA. The TCA also has bilateral accumulation rules that mean that some content from the content from the EU and the content from the EU-UK can be accumulated. So you satisfy the local content rules that way, and that does help you to some extent. But, and there is a but here, the agreement also provides for onward processing rules. So if you're bringing something in from the EU and you're not doing anything to it in GB, you're simply distributing it from GB into NI on an at-risk basis, you may not satisfy the rules of origin. In other words, you may not be able to claim UK content for that good because you haven't done any processing in GB. And that may mean that you have to pay a tariff. And I know that's a little bit counterintuitive, but that is the rule in the agreement. And that GB to NI movement would be regarded as a sort of secondary movement. And this is, and just to point out, this is not a mistake. This is not something people have forgotten about, and now it's becoming a problem. This is a very deliberate action by the EU because it doesn't want GB to become a distribution point for the EU. And unfortunately, Northern Ireland is caught by that because of the specific provisions in the Northern Ireland Protocol. However, the way to avoid this is, as I said again, is to, if you can, sign up for the UK trader scheme and be a not at risk trader. You don't have to worry about any of this. If you're a very small trader, or you don't have many movements from GB to NI, then our advice to you is to go straight to the waiver, and you can opt to claim the waiver on the link that we put there on the slide. And put NI code onto your supplementary declaration, and you won't have to pay the duty provided you haven't gone above the ceilings. If we go to the next slide, we have a very similar decision tree for rest of world to Northern Ireland trade, although you'll always have to pay a tariff because you're coming in from the rest of the world. The question is just whether you pay the GB global tariff rate or whether you pay the EU common external tariff. And this will depend if the EU duty is lower than or equal to the UK duty. If it is lower than or equal to the UK duty, then it's not at risk. If it's above the UK duty, you can still be not at risk unless it's above by more than 3%. And if that's the case, then it defaults to not at risk. You have the same question on EU trade defense measures because you can't use the not at risk category for trade defense products subject to trade defense measures. And then you have the same issues on commercial processing, the same exceptions, and the same end use criteria, selling to wholesale, selling to retail, selling to wholesale, selling to retail. And we understand there's quite a big category of people who are in that selling to what they would regard as wholesale, but essentially they're selling to aggregators who sell on into the retail market, and they would be covered under the UK trader scheme. So you've got a range of options there, and of course, paying the applicable UK duty is more advantageous in many cases. So again, when you're declaring for rest of world, you would declare that you're on the UK trader scheme, and you'd also declare the special UK rate of tariff in that case. We go to the next slide.
I think that might be it, which is, I think, in the interest of time, it might be worth if we.
Yeah. I guess we got questions and so on. Yeah, I mean, I would just say those are the 4 checks that you would use. There's an extensive webinar on this, so Shen will send you the link to the webinar. Have a look at the webinar if you've got further questions on this. Happy to answer them. But the most important takeaway here is if you can be on the UK trader scheme, you need to be on it. That is the strong guidance that we are giving you today. And to the extent you thought, well, maybe we can't be on it. And I should say, just in closing, I know that the issue of having a Northern Ireland facility has been an impediment for many of your, maybe you've got suppliers who need to be on it, and they're telling you that they can't be. They can be. There is a temporary easement of the requirement for a Northern Ireland facility, and there will be news on that in the next few days. But certainly what I would say to you is, if the reason that you're not on the UK trader scheme, or your GB supplier is not on the UK trader scheme, is because they don't have a facility in Northern Ireland, that is not a reason. They need to be on the scheme. If that is the only impediment, they need to be on the scheme. So I'll close with that, and happy to go into Q&A. I know we've had quite a few questions, some of which we've tried to answer already.
And here's just a list of easy links to all of the guides and stuff that we've spoken about, which we'll share after. So I think that's the end of the deck.
Okay, Shanela, Shanker, Frank, thanks for that. Frank, do you want to run through the questions, or do you want me to just read out the outstanding questions? What would be your preference?
Yeah, that would be great, Colm. I think if we go through, I flagged a few at the beginning. If we start at the beginning, we might have time to go through all of them, but
yeah, the first one, with anything that you have said that you're answering live, does that mean you've answered it, you're happy, or do you want to just...
Answering live is, I think it's probably an update that we need to do.
Yeah. Well, the first one, do you want to deal with that one? Yeah.
So if completing the sub-deck for DAP, so that means the declarations of responsibility of the buyer. 40% at risk of going to the Republic of Ireland. Purchase from GB with origin in France. Can you part allocate the waiver? So the preference is not to use the waiver for the whole consignment. A really good question. Shanker, do you want to cover that one?
Yeah, so you can, there's no bar to you being on the UK trader scheme if you have essentially mixed loads, some things that are going into ROI, some things that are staying in Northern Ireland. What you do have to do, though, is you have to have a real mechanism that separates them. So if you're bringing everything in and you've got no way of determining what goes to the Republic of Ireland and what goes to Northern Ireland, you won't be able to use the UK trader scheme. And therefore, if you want to use the waiver, you'd have to use the waiver for all of those products, because all of those products would be at risk. And the waiver would operate in the way that we described. So I just lost the question for some reason. I think that I can't see the question now. So I think that covers that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I answered.
Well, I can read it again. It's if you're completing a supply declaration for DAP goods and 40% is at risk of going into ROI, having been purchased from GB with COO France, can you part allocate waiver, preference not to use waiver for whole consignment?
Yeah, so basically, as I said, what you would do there is, if you've got control over the 60% that's staying in Northern Ireland, you would register as under the UK trader scheme. You would declare those 60% using the NI-REM code, the additional information code, and you would use the waiver only for the 40%. That is possible. But having said all that, you have to have a real mechanism for the 60%. In other words, you have to have control over that 60%. And if what you're doing is actually bring them all into a warehouse and you have no way of knowing where they're all going, you're just estimating that about 60% of them are not at risk, that will not be enough. You will not be able to use the UK trader scheme, because you are not a not at risk trader, because because you don't satisfy the control provisions, and you'll have to use the waiver for the whole lot.
Okay, given the time, maybe we just move on to the next question. I'm happy to read out the next one, Frank, which is, our company is based in Warrenpoint. However, we have a depot in Walsall and move goods between GB and NI. Prior to Brexit, we would have done interstock transfers between location. We have moved goods this year from GB to Warrenpoint, and the haulage firm has used the TSS to move the goods. We are then required to do the SDI, but it's the one company. Are there any alternative options without us having to raise an invoice for moving these goods within the same company?
Yeah, I mean, you can use a stock transfer. I mean, if it's an intercompany trade, you can use a stock transfer form. The issue is the valuation of the goods, and you would under sort of WTO rules on custom valuation, you can put in your declared, you know, your importer's declared value. So yeah, I mean, our recommendation would be use a stock transfer form for that.
Okay, then moving on to the next one. Can Irish haulers use the TSS if they ship goods from GB to Ireland using Belfast port? And then they've clarified it later on, the ferry route is Carnryan to Belfast.
Yeah. So the issue there is, can it be used? In other words, can you use TSS without saying who it is who's using it? From a TSS perspective, you can absolutely have a movement that is actually GB to NI that ultimately ends up in Ireland under free circulation. And this is, we don't see it too much with Carnryan and Belfast, but we see it a lot with Haitian Warrenpoint, obviously. And we absolutely can do that. The problem is that it has to be an NI entity that is registered on TSS. So there would have to be an agent of the Irish haulier or the Irish importer, or a subsidiary of the Irish importer, or an NI haulier, or a subsidiary of the Irish haulier that is an NI-based company. So there's any number of ways you can get an NI entity to be registered on TSS. The only thing that TSS can't do is register an Irish entity, because, and the reason for that is the TSS obviously is taxpayer funded, it's UK taxpayer funded, and it's designed to help the GB-NI movement principally. So it can be done, and it is, in fact, it is being done regularly. And we know that because the probably 20% of our ENS declarations are using Warrenpoint port, and Warrenpoint is primarily, as you know, Irish trade. So even though it's a port in Northern Ireland.
Okay, thanks for that, Shanker. Then moving on, it's a haulier here, wish to move goods under transit, but have them come to our temporary storage facility first, where we have approved to act as an authorised consignee under Irish Revenue. We have been unable to use our Office of Destination on the transit axle provided by TSS. Oops, it's just jumped on me. Yeah, provided by TSS, as the only option is for Dublin or Rosslare. Will we be able to use our Office of Destination in the future?
Right. So for transit, the Office of Destination on the lost the question again. The Office of Destination, the Office of Destination for transit is the destination in Northern Ireland. Sorry, the Office of Destination for transit purposes is the Irish port that you're transiting through. That's what you put on the form. That has nothing to do with the destination of the goods. That's just the way the forms work. You are absolutely able to use an authorized consignee location. If you've got an authorized consignee location, you've got a transit guarantee, you can absolutely use that. But you'd be doing that transit yourself. If you want to use TSS, because you're using the TSS guarantee and you're using the TSS process, the way you would use that in that particular case is you would fill in the office of, on the form, you would fill in the Office of Destination at Dublin, or the Office of Transit would be Dublin or Rosslare. You would do the PBN on that basis. You would indicate that the goods are you're going to the authorized consignee location, or you're going to the Office of Destination in, and that would be Belfast, Warrenpoint, or Larne. Now, if you've got your own temporary storage facility and you've got your own authorized consignee location, then my advice to you is, if you've got those, I would imagine you have a transit guarantee as well. And the best advice to you is use your transit guarantee. Now, as we're building this route, this TSS transit service, we will have our own authorized consignee locations in due course. And this is relevant to the Newry Chamber here particularly. One of those authorized consignee locations, I think, will be pretty good for destination in and around the Newry area. Because obviously you don't want to go all the way up to Belfast and then come back down again. You know, that would not make a lot of sense logistically. But certainly right now, the best advice is you put in the Office of Transit, which would be the Irish port, you do the PBN, you drive to the Newry, wherever you're going, wherever you're unloading in Newry, and you simply, if you've not heard from Border Force in that 6-hour period, you simply unload your goods.
Thanks for that, Shanker. We'll just keep moving on here. The next question is, the UK Trader Scheme application asks questions which lead to the conclusion that you do not qualify to be authorised if the goods are processed or are not subject to non-commercial processing. It didn't appear to be an independent authorisation which could just be held, and then the non-commercial processing question could be considered at a later point for the particular goods imported.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the decision tree that we put up there is not a time decision. I mean, it is a decision tree. It's the decisions that you have to make. So there isn't a process where you get authorized and then you determine whether you're processing or not. You have to know that at the beginning. What this question is about is, the general rule is that if you are commercially processing goods in Northern Ireland, you can't be on the UK Trader Scheme. It is a default to at risk. Now, there are exceptions that the Joint Committee has agreed for food, for construction, for not-for-profit, etc. And that's all in our guidance and our webinar and our tariff guides. And if you're in that, and then of course, non-commercial processing refers to the small processor exception, which is if you are under £500,000 in revenue per year, you'll always be, you'll always have an exception you can use, and you can always be not at risk, provided the other criteria are satisfied. So if you are a commercial processor and you do not fall into any of the exceptions, then you cannot be not at risk. And that's what that question in the form is about.
Okay, thanks. I'll move on. I see somebody has their hand up. We'd prefer if you just put your question through the Q&A, given the number of questions and the time we have here. So I'll just keep moving. Our supplier has advised they don't have the country of origin detail and won't be able to provide this year, but supply us DAP. 50% goes into NI and 50% into the Republic. Do we have to pay tariffs on the at-risk element until they can confirm origin?
So in a DAP case, it's the importer that has the responsibility for the customs declaration. And under the terms of the UK-EU TCA, importers' knowledge can be used to essentially make the declaration. If you don't know where, you know, the country of origin detail, then you can't in good faith make that importer's knowledge declaration. And therefore, if 50% is going at risk, subject to everything we said before about segregation of the things that are going to Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland, then unfortunately a tariff would be applicable. Now, I would question why they're not able to provide you this information, and I would, you know, it depends on what the product is. And there are some products where the tariff, the European external tariff, is quite high. So I would be, particularly in agriculture, particularly in SBS, some of the foodstuffs, etc. I would go back to them, and I would be quite firm about getting this information from them, because they obviously know it. So you know, I'm not sure why they would not want to be providing you this, because it could have a big impact on you.
Okay, thanks. The next one, HMRC updated its Notice 725 yesterday to say that an AXI EORI number could be used for triangulation when goods move between 2 EU countries, but not entering and leaving Northern Ireland. Is this right? And is it not open to abuse, as a GB business could buy, sell one item domestically in Northern Ireland to be registered as trading under the NI protocol and get an AXI VAT number, but then use it for its trade for Germany to ROI, say, which has nothing to do with the NI protocol?
Not sure about that. I mean, it's important to point out that the XI EORI number is an EU EORI number. So all it is a prefixed number. So you get your GB EORI, and you have an XI prefix on the GB EORI number. The EORI number is a VAT number, you know. So it's GB plus VAT number. So it already is an EU EORI number. And if you're a Northern Ireland trader and you're trading, you know, rest of world, and you need to use the XI EORI because you're entering the information into an EU-facing system, such as the ICS for an entry summary declaration, you'd use your your XI EORI number in that case. So I'm not sure where the abuse would be coming from here, Frank. I don't know if you have any.
No, I think I'd like to take that one away and see what Notice 725 is saying, because as you were saying, the XI number is an EU number anyway. I've cut and pasted that one, so if I can come back.
Also, I mean, I'd also point out it's not difficult to get an EORI number. I mean, it's a very straightforward process, so I'm not sure there's any value to doing this when you can just get an EORI number, an appropriate EU EORI number if you're selling into Europe from GB.
The difficulty is the questions from an anonymous attendee, so I can't send on the answer to them. So unless you have like a Q&A, you could put that up on that. The remaining couple of questions there are duplicate questions from earlier on, and we've just come up to our allotted time slot anyway, 12 o'clock. So if you're happy, we'll call it a wrap at that point. Just from a Chamber's point of view, we've again enjoyed hosting this event for businesses this morning. And on behalf of everyone, can I thank Shanker, Shonali and Frank for their presentation and input into the Q&A. Just at this point, I want to flag up a further event. Next Wednesday, the 10th of March, Newry and Dundalk Chambers will be holding our annual conference. This year's theme is Post-Brexit Sustaining and Building Cross-Border Cooperation and Trade. And contributors will include Taoiseach Micheál Martin and the Executive's Finance Minister, Conor Murphy. Other speakers will include representatives from Intertrade Ireland. The conference is free and you can register via our website, www.newrychamber.com. So we hope you can join us on the 10th, and we hope you find this morning very useful. And thank you again for joining us. Good morning.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.